So as Jan was saying, if there's a question partway through, I'll try to look out for you if you raise your hand or call out, I guess, and then our translators could either translate your question in English, or you can ask in English if that's comfortable or what you want to do. And I'd like to thank Jan for the opportunity to come here today and speak about my work. And also a big thanks to everybody here at the museum and everybody who helped make this possible. For me, this is a special talk. I haven't given I haven't spoken about my work outside of a native English-speaking country ever. So my first time having a non-native English audience. So again, I'll try to speak slowly and clearly. But yeah, questions, if anyone has any, I'm happy to pause for that. Okay? So, let's see. So, a little background about me. I was born in West Virginia in 1972. My parents were both absolute hippies. They were sort of, Dad was always busy doing whatever he could do to avoid going to Vietnam, and my mom was also very politically active and trying to help people escape getting drafted, because at that time they were drafting people to go to the war. So from there we moved west, and I mostly grew up in the Northwest, Washington State for the most part, and skipping ahead, I went to the University of Washington in Seattle for my undergraduate studies, and there I mostly specialized in printmaking, and it was a very fun time to be living in Seattle. It was the 90s, and so I got to experience grunge in all of its glory or anti-glory. So from there, a little bit after leaving that university, I moved to New York City because it became apparent that everything was going on there. I would read art magazines and I could see that everything they were writing about seemed to be happening there. And even at that time, there wasn't that much going on in LA or the other cities, so I was super curious. And so that was 1999 that I went to New York, and I worked there for almost 2 years, I guess, as a printmaker. And I was working in a small printmaking studio, making prints for other artists, mostly etchings. And after that, it became apparent I needed to go to graduate school if I wanted to kind of forward my career. And part of it was actually because I was working so hard, I didn't really have much time to meet other people. And I hardly knew any other artists, and I was very, very naive about the art world and the galleries and all of that. I think I had been to Chelsea one time by the time I started graduate school. So graduate school for me was very useful, just even to get to know other artists. I went to Rutgers University. It's the State University of New Jersey, and it's in the area of New York City, but I guess it's sort of like the way the NRW sort of spreads out. You have Dusseldorf and Cologne. New York and New Jersey are a little bit like that. So my second day of grad school, I was out going for a little run before school, and I just happened to watch the World Trade Center, the whole thing go down, both buildings, and that was a very intense experience because I was about a mile away and could see the whole thing with my naked eye. And I guess needless to say, that created a strange atmosphere in graduate school for me because we had all just started and this major thing had happened and nobody knew what to do. We were all very shocked, and we couldn't imagine that we had to make art then. Nobody felt like making anything. It was very numbing. And so our teachers made us put a show up almost immediately, which in the end I think was a really good thing. It forced us to get going. But we all had this special sense of urgency. This, I think, more than usual, a feeling that we wanted what we did with our lives to really count. We wanted to feel that we were in the right place, doing the right thing, and not wasting our time. And I think that you already have that feeling when you do go to school, especially when you're working on your art. And so this made it just even more intense. I think that we were probably all even way more self-involved even than we would have normally been as art students. But that ended up being an exciting thing. So I'll just start. I'm just trying to.
Oh, sorry, it's the other way around.
Oh, thanks. Okay, so I'm showing a few images of my earlier works from this time in school that I was telling you about. And these are slide scans, so I apologize for the poor quality of the images. Let's see. So these were things that I made in 2002. And I guess to strengthen our grasp on contemporary art, our art criticism seminar had us reading a lot about minimalism and post-minimalism and a bit of conceptualism, but the main emphasis was on Donald Judd, and I feel like his ghost still sort of rules over New York City as a sort of like disapproving overlord. And even though I loved his work then, I found it oppressive, and a lot of the things that he said about sort of painting versus sculpture to me didn't seem true, but I felt like a lot of people still agreed with what he was saying, and same with some other artists and writers from that era like Michael Fried or Robert Morris. And I kept wondering if there was another way around that, like, is it true that painting can't occupy the space in the way that sculpture does? And I felt that it could, and so I was sort of trying to prove that to myself and thinking of ways that I could get painting out into the atmosphere, or the way that painting would share the space that we're breathing and moving through, rather than just sitting on a wall and sort of being its own dimension. And I had this feeling that I could do that, and also have works that showed space, or sort of maybe flirted with the idea of deep space, while also sort of coming into space a little bit more aggressively. So it's a little hard to see here, but this is pretty thick oil paint. And these guys are about this big. And at this time in New York, abstract painting was very uncool, especially for young people. It was still, the 90s had just ended. It was really all about video and photography and especially installation, but there was like no one under like 40 at all doing abstract painting, and hardly anyone under 50. So we felt like total dorks, because like out at my school, there were quite a few of us, and I think we were the maybe first or second class that got to be known as like, oh, that's that weird school where these abstract painters are going. And I think part of that is because we had a super great professor, Tom Noskowski, and in my opinion, he's very special as far as painting goes, because when he makes a painting, his idea is that he's having a new experience every single time. And overall, you start to get an idea that this is what his work feels like. It all has this, what I would describe as like a folksy feeling. And yet, I still feel like this kind of work is related somehow to abstract expressionism. And then in a strange way for me, all of this painting, especially in New York, started to feel to me more like folk art. And I had this feeling that we were all just folk artists, that what we were doing was, in fact, quite provincial. And these are some of my favorite painters from when I was in school. This is a Laura Owens painting from the late 90s. And she started out doing more abstract work, but it was still super narrative. And one thing that I really liked about this painting is that it has its own sort of private, idiosyncratic narration involved, and you can kind of get pulled into it, and maybe you can wonder about what it means, but you don't have to know exactly what she was getting at. It looks maybe like a broken egg or something. And this is Monique Prieto, also from the late 90s or maybe very early 2000s. And her work has changed a lot, just like Laura Owens. And they were contemporaries, both coming out of LA, just a little bit older than me. And I started to have this idea that the painters in LA were having more fun, and they were happier, and their work was much more colorful. I don't know if that was true or not, but I felt like the painting in New York was darker. People were still using mostly oil. There wasn't as much color. It felt more linked to Abex, and this stuff felt more linked to like Hollywood or Las Vegas. This is a painting by Mary Heilman, who is a really big influence of mine, maybe even too much so. Some of the work, now this is a painting of mine that I think I might have been ripping her off just a little bit. But the difference between me and the last painting was I was actually more interested in this kind of cartoonal element, so where she would just let a drip be a drip. I was a little more controlling and I think maybe a little more funny about it. I wanted it to be a cartoon of a drip rather than an actual drip. So, let's see. Anyhow, so about halfway through graduate school, something else happened in New York that really changed us all, which is there was a huge exhibition of Gerhard Richter at the Museum of Modern Art. And it just kind of, it rocked our world. Like, we really freaked out, and we couldn't believe not only how much work there was, but how good it was. And one really great thing about it was that he just made such a strong argument that it doesn't really matter whether you're doing abstraction or figuration. And in a way, I believe, and I think he sort of proves this, that all art is abstract, especially all painting is abstract. So it makes you kind of aware of these sort of categories that I think are more like possibly tools of the market that kind of put us into these sort of false niches. And I think in some ways these categories can be a little bit debilitating for people. But even still, if somebody asks me about my work, I say, oh, I'm an abstract painter. I mean, I guess it's useful for that. But I always kind of cringe a little bit when I say that. Like, I don't know. It's so general, and even like, I don't know what you guys think about it, but you think abstract painter. I do think of hotel art or something. It sounds awful. So, 1 second. So these are some more oil paintings that I was doing right after I got out of graduate school. And go back one. Getting a little bit more into the idea of using pattern more. And this was a really big no-no at the time that I was making painting in New York, because this was like, the older generation still remembered pattern and decoration, which people really widely despised. I mean, people just hated this work. And especially if you were a woman, there was this big danger that you could be like putting yourself in that camp of these women making these like pattern and decoration paintings, which I actually kind of like them now, but at the time I was really scared that I would be aligned with that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, much more interested in like opening up painting and particularly like abstraction to different types of people, not just to women, but to different cultures, that it shouldn't have to be this like actually tiny little thing that happens with this small elite body of people, that it could be a little more democratic, I guess. And so thinking about folk art in a more specific way and looking at things like pottery or quilts that my grandmother made. And then this skips ahead just a little bit to some works that were from my first solo show in New York City, and I'm still thinking here about opening up this language of abstract painting to other walks of life and having it not be such a such an elite or such a closed off thing. Just wanting to let it soak up more. I feel like one of the coolest things about painting is that it's so impure. So wanting to let it be more impure and wanting to include some like horrible moments, like some really like painful pinks or, you know, super tacky purples, like stuff you would see, you know, in super cheap, you know, stores in the mall, like wanting it to kind of be a little bit about that. And I guess that's a little bit of a hotel thing too. But then at the same time feeling like to move forward, that I was wanting to like see things that I hadn't seen, and I had this idea of like having pieces of different paintings kind of put together either in like a quilt or some kind of a collage of images where maybe two paintings came together, and thinking a lot about the sort of I guess function of forms within paintings. And just how far you could push that idea of like formalism, like at what point do the shapes become like a machine? And this painting is called Buzz Bomb. I don't know what it is in centimeters. It's about this big. And this is also kind of coming out of this idea of like using a bit of pattern, but kind of having some kind of collision or pushing things together in a way that isn't super easy. I think that I'm always wanting my work to disturb just a little bit, maybe not 100% of the time, but often. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay, so anyhow, this was, I guess, 2006 in New York, and things were changing a little bit, both for painters and for women artists. We were being included in a lot more, and I think people were becoming more interested, and part of it, I think, was the uncovering of this history of object-like painting that had come out of the late 60s and early 70s, and this was all of the work of all the artists that really wouldn't have been respected by people like Donald Judd, and people were looking at this work and saying, hey, wait a minute, you know, this was great, and there were women making art in the 70s and late 60s, and some of them were doing really good things, and even like one German, Blinky Palermo, was there for a little while doing this kind of thing. So it wasn't as closed off as the history that we had a few years earlier would have made that seem. There was an exhibition that was really important to a lot of people in New York called High Times, Hard Times, and it was curated by the artist David Reed with the historian Katie Siegel. And it was really looking hard at a lot of these things. This issue about object-like painting happening at the end of the 60s, early 70s, and coming out of New York. And it was such a great show, and it really changed art in the city. And I think it's safe to say, like, my show happened right around the time that was happening, and I was already super influenced by that work because I actually worked for David as an assistant, and I worked a lot on that show. So I was kind of obsessed. But strangely, like my work by then, I was moving away from making such object-like painting, and I was not feeling like I had as much to prove. I was just okay with having a little more fun and not being so strict and just like really painting what I wanted to see. But always really interested in having it feel new each time. I think that was something that Thomas Naskowski, I feel like he really gave me permission to do that in the way that he worked. And also being an artist's assistant in New York and knowing so many other artists' assistants, I feel like we would go through the shows and we had a way of looking at the work that is not the way that most people would look at work, because the first thing we would see was how many assistants it took to make that painting. And we just most of us felt like, oh, I don't want to make that kind of work, because you feel the work. You feel the kind of, there's something oppressive about, like, maybe a Jeff Koons painting. It's so big, and it took such a factory to make that. And for me, that really affects the meaning of the work. So I'm usually very interested in the human hand, and even maybe a sort of weakness, or not weakness, but fragility. And this painting is called Headlights, and this was actually based on a quilt that my grandmother made, and it's kind of an inside joke. I don't know if you have the expression headlights in Germany, which is basically if a woman is not wearing a very thick bra, okay. So it's always a sense of humor is something I'm interested in. Yes? Oh, sure. So this painting is about this big. And the one before it, these are sort of companion pieces. I think of this as sort of like a girly wallpaper painting. And it's the same size. This one is a bit bigger. It's called Big Rock Candy, and again, I'm just having fun, and I'm thinking about the drip and where we can go with the drip. And again, I have sort of like colorful cartoon drips, and yeah, it's just basically a very friendly painting. And this is really sort of a candy painting. It's like my idea was, if you had these, I don't know if you have them here, jawbreakers. It's this round candy. My idea was it's solid sugar, but it's like beautiful, and it's like speckled all different colors. It's like totally amazing, but they're kind of disappointing. They don't taste very good. My idea was to make a painting that would sort of feel like it looks like to look at a jawbreaker. It was funny, at a time my friend said, you should have just made that out of jawbreakers. But he was a sculptor. So something that I have with almost every painting I do is a kind of a narrative. And it's not really so important that the narrative comes through to the people looking at the painting, but just to share with you, one narrative is, this painting is called Isis, Savior Painting, and it's about this big, and it's a combination of acrylic and oil. Wait, if I can do the pointer. Well, the brown is oil, and so it has more of a texture, and the rest of it's acrylic. And the sort of idea was, I had a show in a space that was just, this very intimidating white cube, and I was always kind of, how do I say? I thought that seemed like such a kind of creepy atmosphere. It wasn't a comfortable place, and it felt so like dead or closed off. And I just sort of spun this fiction that so the painting is the white cube, and then this sort of like pattern is what I kind of thought of as would be like an Egyptian type of a religious motif. And then the brown are sort of like ropes, so it's as though like some goddess had come to like rescue me out of my white cube. So this painting is called Camel Walk. It's about this big. And still just having fun here and playing with gold paint and thinking about ornament and how far I can push that. How ornamental can you make a painting before it turns into, I guess, decorative hotel art. And then in the bottom, I just sort of squished my palette onto it. Was something that we often talk about as painters is how the palette can look so much more exciting than the painting. And how do you make the palette be as exciting or as delicious as the painting? So it's sort of an inside joke for me, I guess, that I just. But I think, do you guys talk about that here? A little bit. And another one, super ornamental gold bands, but it's not that big. It's about this tall. And I was actually looking a lot at Odilon Redon, and I just love how he will just really like squish a lot of paint, and it just all kind of becomes an in-between color often, but you can find these little nuggets of color in there. And then often he'll have a sort of illustrated part or maybe a slightly ornamented part that kind of like, maybe it pops you back into reality. But I always find the squishy parts of paint, the palette-y parts of paint to be sort of dreamy for me anyway. It's something I never get tired of staring at that kind of stuff. And this is a bigger painting. It's about this big. And this is from Frankfurt. So I left New York in 2009 to do residency in Frankfurt. And my feeling was that I would be there till the end of the residency. It was a 6-month residency. And I haven't gone back to New York. I've been kind of a nomad ever since. I keep thinking I'll go back and telling everyone I'm going back, but then I don't go back. So it was really interesting for me to be in Frankfurt, thinking about where I was coming from and thinking about my friends back home and still thinking about like abstraction and painting and what it meant to be a New York painter there. And strangely, when I first got there, people weren't really doing so much abstraction, and it was kind of novel. This was 2009. And yeah, this painting is called The Stuff, and it's based on a horror movie where there's this stuff that takes over the city, and it's like pink marshmallow foam. And it's like hilarious and disgusting. Basically, like people love it and they're eating it, and then of course, like somebody's head breaks off and the stuff just comes out. It's great. And this painting is called Saint Vitus Dance. And now I've just gone completely into acrylic. I'm not using oil anymore. It's about this big. And it's not square. One side One side is shorter. And this painting is about this big, going back again to the idea of sort of collapsing or colliding multiple paintings into one, seeing if I can get a little friction by doing that. And this painting is called Electric Maple. It's about that tall, that wide. And this is a big painting with tiny little paintings on it. Those little round bits are smaller round paintings that I've glued to the surface. So with the idea of using like multiple units or sections or paintings together, I started to kind of play around with that a little bit more. And in a way, going back to some of my earlier work from grad school, having these sort of small paintings, this guy is like maybe this tall, that sit on the floor and they lean against the wall. And I guess I like this, there's something kind of humble about it, having it be a floor piece. And I was interested in, I guess, the idea that you could have more distance between the languages used in each piece if they were on different canvases. Here's another one. This is actually a triptych, and it's about this wide with all three. I wanted to have depth and I wanted to have surface. And I wanted to argue for both in the same work. I also wanted to have things that didn't really go together. Here's another one called Porn Poem. I called it Porn Poem because there's a thing about the quality of paint. I mean, I feel like if you love paint, it's really dangerous because even just one little drop or one splatter or one smear, it could really be enough because it can be so delicious to you. Sometimes it's hard to keep going. This painting is larger. It's, I guess, about 150 centimeters wide. And it's called Uranium Leak. And something that I sometimes bring back in my work is using a little bit of fluorescent color. For me, I like this notion that maybe it's a little bit toxic. I guess paint is kind of toxic anyway. This painting is called Pillow Talk. And it's a little bit smaller. I'm starting to use more, I guess, drawing in my work and not differentiating as much about the difference between how the marks are made, which is drawing and which is painting. And here's a bigger one. It's, I guess this one is 150 wide. And so now I've moved to Istanbul, and making work there was even stranger than making work in Frankfurt, because then I felt really far from everything I knew and everyone I knew, and not only was I far physically, but like nobody really knew the artists that I knew, and almost no one was interested in what I liked, and I found it a really stimulating and inspiring place, but I almost never saw any work that I liked there at all. I would look, and it was just, part of it was a matter of like difference in taste, difference in interest, but Turkey has seen a coup almost once every 10 years, going back to like 1970 or the 60s. So the country hasn't had a chance to really develop I guess, a new kind of art culture. And I think on the one hand, that's exciting because you think, okay, well, here are a lot of artists now in a lot of art spaces who are engaging and making new things and looking around the world and seeing what's going on, yet they don't have the same language that we have. And I feel like, in a way, I'm hungry for that, or the world is hungry for that, the possibilities of something new that would evolve in a place with a completely different history, but that was still completely looking to other histories, or rather just kind of, it's like hopping on the back of a train or something, but you know, you're interested in where it goes, but you don't know what's in each car. And I think it could get better and better there if the political situation will stop putting intellectuals and professors and journalists in prison. Artists don't really get put in prison. Hopefully, knock on wood, that won't happen. But I lived there for 4 years. And in the end, it got kind of scary. We had to leave because our apartment was just filling with tear gas too often. Tear gas, yeah. Yeah, demonstrations, yeah, everywhere. But one thing I thought about more there, a lot of things there are gold, and it's a very busy and dirty and crowded city. So I think a lot of my art then got a lot more kind of claustrophobic, darker, more gold, maybe more purple. I had my studio in this part of town where it was all coal heat, and if the weather held the smoke in, you couldn't even see down the road. And one thing that I come back to from time to time is faces. And I really like it when a face comes out. I don't ever plan it, but I feel like, I think that painting is one of the most human things that you can do. And to me, it's natural that faces will pop out from time to time. And this work was starting to go in a direction where I was actually basing it on something slightly more specific, which was I got really into reading Philip K. Dick, and I was actually thinking about a lot of the ideas in his stories and the ways that they could, I guess, generate paintings. But one thing that he'll often have in his stories is some kind of a system for projecting your consciousness. So in this one book called the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldridge, the characters have what's called a layout, and it's kind of like a board game, but they take a drug with it, and when they look at it, it actually casts their entire consciousness into another dimension with their friends, where they're all having the same experience, which I think actually that experiencing art can be very similar to that, where so much of the information can be so vague. You don't know what everything means. You don't have to know what everything means, but you can still have an experience. This painting is called Miss Mustache. It's 150 centimeters square. This is 150 centimeters square. It was getting more mechanical. I'm starting to use more stencil material and pencils and pens, and in a way the painting is starting to become more like a drawing again. And it's called Babies on Fire. This is also 150 centimeters wide. This is a little smaller, like this big. This painting contains another painting. So it's actually two paintings, but I've attached, so the yellow part is about this big, and then it holds the smaller painting. This is a sort of a collage painting, a combination of drawing and painting. So you can sort of see these are pieces of like tracing paper that I've taped to the canvas. This is 150 wide. I used to spend a lot of time going to the markets in Istanbul, and I was looking at a lot of rugs and ceramics and kind of ornamented things from all over, and I really loved traveling there. But this painting is called Chowpatty Beach. It's about a beach that I went to in Mumbai. That's famous for its ice cream. They have super weird flavors. This sort of a landscape. Oh yeah, these are all larger. This one is I think 150 wide by 180 tall. And then here's a little guy, really little. Also smaller. So now I'm in Berlin. I've moved to Berlin about a year and a half ago. And this one is also a little smaller. This is a big one. It's I think it's 150 by 180. I was supposed to have a show at this gallery, and I felt like he kept putting me off for artists who like happened to be men, but I wasn't even thinking about that until he said, I really need to show more women painters. We'll definitely do something someday. And I just was like, what does a woman painter make? So I just kind of made this like ugly flower painting. And it's big. This one's a little bit smaller, like just more of a kind of drawing painting again. It had a big eye, you can see in the upper right-hand corner, but it was scaring me. I wasn't comfortable with it. This painting has a ton of it's actually gold pigment, the dark stuff that I just glued to the canvas. One thing that I'm starting to think about more is, I guess, the chain of supply. So where does something come from? And how do you break it down, like from, paint to pigment, to paint store, to truck, to mine, to some country? What's the chain of command and supply in what you're doing? And this painting is called Hairy Pits. These little hairy pits up here. I think that I'm comfortable with anthropomorphizing about anything. And now we're in Dusseldorf. So I've been doing a residency in Dusseldorf since the summer. And I'll be showing you some work now that I've made there. And it's been super amazing for me because I've been able to just focus on my work every day and not have to worry so much about either a day job or traveling from my studio to my apartment, because it's all in the same building. And I'm there a few more weeks. If any of you are around, you're welcome to come by. I had some of you there last week. It was really fun for me. I really like to be around students. So it didn't quite come through with the photography, but this band that sort of wraps around is kind of a fluorescent pink, like a pale fluorescent pink. And for me, like this, so this, the weird story behind this painting, this is sort of a hippie punk rocker, but it's also kind of a Duchamp machine. So I think of these drawn lines as the sort of machine, and then the painted part is the more sort of looser, more bodily thing, like this orange area down here, getting back into a more kind of friendly patterning thing. Maybe that's like the drum circle. But to me, the combo of black and pink is like a classic punk rock combo, which I've always loved. And what it was punk doing its version of the 50s. And here are two paintings in one. Oh yeah, and these were all fairly large. They're this one is 220 centimeters wide by 180 tall. For me, that's large. Huh? So again, like two paintings in one, but this time using one canvas, but trying to be a little bit forceful in putting things together that, to me, don't seem like they should totally go together. So sort of like a landscape with a kind of patterny, more surface-oriented, abstract painting on the right. And then, yeah, I've been thinking a lot about that sort of supply and the chain of material, and where does it come from, and how literal can I get with that? And I'm starting to do more things with either pigment, like the case of this blue one. This is one of those little things from a watercolor set, or pictures of pigment. And also incorporating a wider range of influence with my sources. So I'm looking at a lot of charts and grids and information about really important things, because I'm thinking a lot too about this idea of information overload. Like everything you do now, there's just like too much information, you know. You can't just eat a piece of fruit. You can't do anything. Like life has become so complicated. And rather than closing that out, I'm just incorporating that now. So these were some, I think that there were some statistics on power usage in German homes or something like that. And I'm not so concerned about the source of the information. I'm just interested in the look of information. And this is a little bit smaller. And this painting I called The Hunger. It's like, I just felt like this was like so greedy, and it kind of, I guess, was emblematic of how much that I want each thing that I make to have. It's like I really want to have everything. And so these green things are part of a stencil that I used in another painting. And then the rest of it is made out of odds and ends that I have in my studio. Usually when I work, I surround myself with lots of images and things. It's like a hamster's nest or something in there, and I'm just always picking up a little of this or a little of that or looking at that. And I really enjoy moving that stuff around. And I never used to show those things to anyone, but now I've been sharing that with my visitors, and people like it. And it's fun for me to talk about the things and where they come from and how they can go together and how they go into my work, and then also how parts of them come out of the works that I've made. So there's a back and forth. And this is a sort of collage painting combo. And I don't know if you can see. This painting it says China, and I got this canvas at this craft store. It was like €1, and when I got it home, I opened it and I realized it was in such poor condition. I mean, it was made that way that I couldn't use it. And then I just thought, oh, all of this stuff is coming from places like China. In this case, it was China that is just like manufactured garbage. And so I made this little drawing on it, and I wrote China with like glitter stickers. And then the A fell off, and I thought, oh, that's perfect. And then I put a little smiley face. And this is just some more like studio ephemera, sort of loose collages. And this is one that I made the other day, basically where I just take all the things I've been working with and then I lay it out, and I'm not totally sure if it's art or not, but I really enjoy looking at it and showing it to people, and I enjoy the act of moving these things around and the sort of new combinations that I find with them. And yeah, and again, it influences my paintings, and then I also pull things from the paintings that go back into this. And here are just a couple of details from that. I think maybe it's like a condition from like multitasking and spending a lot of time on the computer and doing like 10 things at once. I have this feeling in my studio too where I have to work on like 20 things at a time. And this kind of activity really satisfies that need. It's kind of a little crazy. This is a smaller painting like that. And here I'm using the charts a little more directly. I think this was like stocks and bonds one day on the right. I am into the idea that there could be this like serious, important information given to you in this very like strict way, and then there could be this very bodily, flowing kind of opposite kind of information that is sort of smooshed together into one canvas. And oh, this is the image for the card for the talk. And here's another one. So now I'm just going to show you some work of artists that I like and think about, but just thinking about what I was speaking about, thinking about this kind of supply chain, like where things come from and also where they're going. And I'm thinking about works that are made with an awareness of where they will go. So maybe I'm making that spread out floor thing that I showed you. Part of that, it comes on a piece of foam, so it's ready to put away immediately. This is a sculpture by Rachel Harrison, where she's actually just used a shipping container. And another sculpture that she made with a real can of peas. I hope that it was empty. I don't know. Smell bad. And this is Rosemarie Trockle, who I really, really love. We don't get to see as much of her work in the States as you guys do here. And this is just sort of a foam and plexi vitrine of different types of foam. So thinking more about like shipping and packing, this special discrete language that you can create by just putting things in this type of a display unit. And here's one of her paintings, which is a sweater. It's a knit painting. Here's a close-up. And this is Hanna Darboven, who has a really amazing show in Bonn right now. Both this and with the charcoal, you really get the sense of time. And it's not so much about skill or art even. You just think about like how much time that goes into a person's life and in life of making. And in this show, there's so much of her work. You feel somebody's life is there. For me, it was a profound experience because I hadn't seen that much of her work in one place before. And this is a painter in New York named Mira Dancy, and she takes signs from psychic and massage parlors as part of her source material, and thinking about services that people provide. We have, I don't know if you have pawn shops here, where if you need money, you have that here? Yeah. So this place is a pawn shop and psychic. So you, depending on what you need, or maybe you need both. You probably need both. When can I pay this back? This is a sculpture by another New York artist named Ina Babaeva. And again, thinking about like consumer objects. And she staged this sort of IKEA intervention. And I really like that she called it an intervention, because I feel like I see the word intervention on like 50% of all like press releases now, and it's just like total bullshit. It's like, this is not an intervention. You just want to say intervention, so you're making this thing that spreads out. But Ina really does it. This one is called Don't Hurry. It's really funny. And then Isagenskin. And Isagenskin again. And here's a painter, Brian Bellot. And I love his work. He just has such a great sense of humor. He will make painting out of anything. And what he's really known for are these sock paintings, which I love. I mean, you can almost smell it, right? Okay, so that's the last one. And any questions? Okay.